Every Saturday night on the East Side, the Clover Leaf Social Club brought the neighborhood to life. Their dance took over the Hall of the Give and Take Athletic Association, a place better known for chin up bars, punching bags, and boys who like to prove themselves with their fists. If you wanted to step onto that dance floor, you had to belong. For the men, that meant being a member of the Give and Take. For most of the women, the way in was a steady job at Rheingold's paperbox factory. There were guest passes here and there, an outsider brought along for a single night at a time, but those were rare and temporary. The rhythm of the place belonged to its own. The routine was simple. A give and take boy picked his paperbox girl, and the two of them circled the room as if they'd been paired for life. It was how things worked and had always worked. Outsiders could watch, maybe even clap along, but very few ever claimed the floor. Saturday nights belonged to this tight-knit circle, a mix of pride, flirtation, and a few rough edges just beneath the polish of dance music and cologne. Maggie Toole never stepped into that room on a man's arm. Her looks never drew applause. She had gentle brown eyes that usually seemed dim, a mouth too wide for fashion, and a way of stumbling through the two-step that made her blush. Her blessing and her refuge was her best friend, Anna McCarty, who stood with her day after day at their long wooden table in the box factory. Together they folded and glued and kept one another laughing through the hours. Anna had a steady fellow, Jimmy Burns, and every single Saturday she made sure their path to the dance hall went by Maggie's door so the three of them could go together. For Maggie, those nights were equal parts sweetness and ache. She was grateful to be included, grateful not to be left alone at home, and still, the feeling of being a tag-along clung to her like a shadow. She stood along the wall so often that the plaster must have remembered the shape of her shoulder. Now and then a boy, nudged into it by Anna or duty, would ask her to dance, and she'd thank him so honestly that he seemed embarrassed to take credit. She tried to be light on her feet, but it always felt like she was apologizing with every step. Rheingold's factory closed at 3 on Saturdays, and the streets filled with girls sharing their weeks like secrets. On one of those afternoons, Anna and Maggie walked home together in the soft gray of late day. At Maggie's building, Anna gave their usual goodbye, bright and automatic. 7 o'clock, be ready. Jimmy and I will swing by. She expected a nod, maybe a quick, grateful thanks. That's how it always went, but something was different. Maggie's chin lifted as if a string had been tugged from the clouds. A mischievous light flickered in those brown eyes. The corners of her generous mouth curled into a shy, proud smile. Thanks, Anna, she said, slow and sure, but you and Jimmy don't have to bother tonight. I've got someone. A gentleman friend is coming to take me. Anna stared, then grabbed Maggie by the forearms in delighted disbelief. She laughed, scolded, and begged for details all at once. Maggie, with a fellow, dear Maggie, who never got the first pick, the second, or even a third. When did it happen? Who was he? Where did he appear from? The questions poured out like water from a tipped pail. You'll see, Maggie said, cheeks warm with the thrill of it. He's the real thing, taller than Jimmy by 2 inches, sharp dresser, the kind that turns heads. I'll introduce him at the hall. And just like that, the whole evening felt charged with new electricity. Anna hurried away in a flurry of plans and whispers. Maggie stayed at the door a moment longer, hand on the knob, listening to the quiet buzz under her ribs. Something in her life had shifted. She could feel it like music reaching a room before the band is seen. What none of them knew was that tonight, the dance wouldn't just change pace, it would tilt the world. But what came through the door at 8:30 would set every eye in the hall on fire. She said she'd arrive with a gentleman, yet the man on her arm would light a fuse no one could ignore. Anna and Jimmy were early as usual. They liked to find seats near the wall where Anna could survey the door and Jimmy could judge the competition with that sideways grin of his. The give and take hall was decked out the way it always was on a Saturday night, bunting draped like echoes, the floor polished within an inch of its life, the band testing a jaunty tune that made your feet want to try something bold. Girls from the factory streamed in, pairing their best dresses with the week's tired eyes, and the boys, some in suits that fit, some in suits that tried, strolled the perimeter like contenders before a prize fight. But Anna wasn't watching the crowd. She was watching the entrance. Every time the door pushed open, her face flicked with hope. Jimmy teased her, pretending indifference, though he was curious too, who had scooped up quiet Maggie. At 8:30 sharp, the door opened, and Maggie swept in, not slipped in, not edged along the side, but truly arrived. She looked almost transformed. The glow didn't come from powder or a new hat. It blazed from within, from the dizzying fact that she had a man beside her, a man who wore confidence like a custom coat. Anna's eyes widened. "Would you look at that?" she breathed, half to Jimmy, half to herself. "Our Mag brought a showstopper." Jimmy's mouth tightened with a grit paper sarcasm. "Sure, let's all take a number. The fresh ones always make a splash. Don't trouble about me." "Knock it off," Anna said, elbowing him lightly. "Be glad for her, it's the first time." Across the room, Maggie moved like a small boat towed by a sleek cruiser. Her escort was everything she'd promised. Tall enough to see over most heads, dark hair curled at the ends as if it liked him, teeth and eyes flashing at the slightest excuse. When he smiled, he meant for the room to notice. He had the manner of someone who'd been admired before and didn't mind it one bit. Among the give and take boys, style wasn't a currency they usually traded. They preferred strength over silk, reputation over polish. A man proved himself by how many times he'd lifted himself to the bar, not by how neatly he folded his pocket square. The proper tools for courting were a solid chest, a jacket straining over proud shoulders, and a look that declared, "The world spins because I say so." A hint of bowlegs might even help. It spoke of stances learned in alleys and yards where trouble tested a man's mettle. So when this newcomer started to bow and pivot with metropolitan ease, a few of the boys tipped their chins at an angle that wasn't friendly. Maggie introduced him with a bright, practiced air. "A friend of mine, Mr. Terry O'Sullivan." She said it more than once, guiding him to clusters of faces, adding his name to the room like a flourish at the end of a signature. Word traveled fast. Maggie Toole's got herself a fella. The paperbox girls whispered behind hands and grinned with relief. This was news you could cheer for. The give and take boys, more guarded, muttered their dismissals. "A floorwalker type," one said, as if a shine in your shoes were enough to convict you. Maggie felt a lightness she'd never felt before. Usually she held up the wall and smiled too gratefully when someone offered a pity dance. Tonight, offers came unprompted. Girls asked for introductions to Terry. Boys, suddenly awake to charms they'd missed for 2 years running, approached Maggie with new eyes and outstretched hands. She didn't know where to look first or how to hold all that astonishment in her chest. This could be what happiness sounded like: a waltz, a laugh, her own name spoken not because someone felt sorry for her, but because they wanted her attention. And Terry, he moved through the room like a spark moves through dry straw, everywhere at once, bright, dangerous if mishandled. His bow said thank you without apology. His words ran smooth. The night was climbing toward something. Everyone could feel it, even if they couldn't name it. Maggie finally had her moment in the light, but the brightest flame draws the sharpest shadows. If the Clover Leaf boys were heavy on muscle, Terry O'Sullivan was heavy on gloss. He carried himself with the ease of a man rehearsed in mirrors. Shoulders just so, chin set, smile cocked at the precise angle to charm. When the music shifted from a jaunty two-step to a flowing waltz, he didn't just keep time, he seemed to pour the beat into his partner's bones. He bent without bowing, grinned without grinning too much, and led without leaving bruises. It was a kind of lesson in how to be admired without breaking a sweat. Maggie, who had memorized the patterns in the wallpaper from too many Saturdays, now memorized the ceiling lights as they turned above her with every smooth pivot. She couldn't believe this was her, this was happening, her hand lifted, her step sure, her laughter not caught in her throat. Every time she looked up, Terry's eyes sparkled back a message: "You're the one I'm dancing with." That truth seemed to fill in all the places inside her that had gone hollow from waiting. The room noticed. The girls, even the usual stars of the night, gathered around Maggie during the breaks. "Introduce me, will you?" "Don't be mean, just a quick hello." Their teasing was kind, threaded with a little envy. Maggie presented Terry the way a friend presents a special cake, pleased and proud. The boys were more complicated. Some of them tried extra hard to look casual as they flexed or laughed too loudly. You could see a handful sizing Terry up, deciding where he fit on the map of pride and pecking orders. The give and take crowd didn't believe in losing to strangers, not in fights and not in attention. A few plotted the quick paths to a punchline that would bring him back down to size. Others waited. They could wait all night for an excuse. Terry, all charm, all shine, made the rounds like a man built for it. He danced with this one and that one, joked with the boys, made eye contact with the older men standing guard at the edges. He had that habit men have when they want to look like they belong, light, careless nods, a joke at his own expense, a shrug that said, "I'm no trouble." But charisma can look like arrogance if you tilt it even slightly, and a handful of chins rose just enough to show the shift. Then came the moment that knocked a tremor through the floorboards. Terry took the hand of the paper box girl who had arrived on the arm of Dempsey Donovan, the give and take's quiet, dangerous leader. One waltz is politeness. Two in a row is a statement. Terry danced two. Everyone understood the weight of that choice, even the newcomers. Dempsey was the kind of man a uniform thought twice about touching. He wore a dress suit like it grew on him, and it was said he could do stunts on the gym bar that would make your eyes water. If something rough happened in the neighborhood, the telling of it usually found its way to Dempsey's name. He had friends in important places, large men with bigger cigars, and he knew how to smile at a joke that shouldn't be funny. People like Dempsey don't get embarrassed, they get even. So when Terry spun Dempsey's girl around a second time, the band might as well have struck a dramatic chord. A few of the Clover Leaf boys exchanged slow looks, the kind that mean more than words. Anna squeezed Maggie's hand without thinking. Maggie squeezed back, trying to ignore the chill that sneaked under the warmth. At 10 o'clock, a familiar face appeared at the door for his customary 5-minute sweep of the room, Big Mike O'Sullivan, the local figure whose nod could untangle a lot of knots. He smiled at the girls, handed fat cigars to delighted boys, and took in the whole scene with one glance. Dempsey was at his side almost before he arrived, talking low, moving his hands the way a man does when he's laying out a case. Big Mike listened, measured, then shook his head once. He smiled, the way a banker does after closing a ledger, and stepped out as swiftly as he'd stepped in. The music stopped. The dancers began drifting back to their chairs. Terry, with that smooth bow that had emptied the room of resistance, surrendered his partner, turned, and walked into a wall named Dempsey. The room fell silent without meaning to, because two men met at the only crossroads that mattered. There's a feeling a crowd gets when something important is about to happen, like air pulling back before thunder. That feeling washed through the hall as Dempsey Donovan stepped in front of Terry O'Sullivan and blocked his way with a politeness sharp as glass. A few of the give and take boys edged closer, coat sleeves tight, watches set to slow. The girls, almost as one, leaned forward in their chairs and forgot to breathe. "One moment, Mr. O'Sullivan," Dempsey said, his voice low, the kind that hums with control. Enjoying the evening, his eyes were cool, not a ripple in them. Terry's smile didn't slip. Great room. "Fine music, good." Dempsey's glance flicked to the band, to the board members spaced like chess pieces near the rear door, then back to Terry. "Where do you live exactly?" It was a small question, casually tossed. But men who know the neighborhood understand that certain questions aren't about curiosity, they're about ground. Terry felt the test inside it. He met Dempsey's gaze with a look that dared him to blink. "Over on Grand," he answered. "Not that hard to find me if you're looking." Dempsey didn't blink. "You say your name's O'Sullivan." He said it without a question mark. "Big Mike stopped by just now. He never saw you before." Terry shrugged. There are plenty of things he hasn't seen. A few boys exchanged tiny nods. The lines had been drawn. As a rule, Dempsey continued, his tone turning almost pleasant, O'Sullivans around here know one another. You brought one of our young ladies as your guest tonight. That makes you our business for the moment. If your family tree has a branch in this district, let it wave. Otherwise, we can take a look at the roots. Terry's answer was more smile than sound. Why don't you mind your own affairs? Dempsey's eyes brightened like someone had opened a door and let daylight in. He lifted a forefinger as if struck by inspiration. I've got it, he said, friendly as a shopkeeper. That's the mix-up. You aren't an O'Sullivan after all. You're a circus act we mistook for a gentleman, our mistake. The air around them heated a few degrees. Terry took a step forward, fast, precise, but before his arm could rise, Andy Geoghegan was there, steady and sure, hand clamped on muscle. The board of rules and social referees, the men who kept the hall respectable, appeared with quiet authority. William McMahon, the club's secretary, came in from the side. Four men, no one making a fuss, turned a scene into an exit. This way, one of them murmured, almost kindly. To anyone not paying close attention, it looked like nothing more than a conversation drifting toward the back. But to those who knew how the hall worked, it was a summons. The give and take had a back room rented for handling misunderstandings. No lady had witnessed a fight at a clover leaf hop in years, and that wasn't luck, it was policy. Terry's chin lifted. He didn't argue. His pride did the talking for him. He went where they pointed, without a flinch. You could almost hear the murmurs coil and uncoil across the floor. Maggie, still warm with the glow of her perfect evening, didn't catch the change. She was scanning the room for Terry when Rose Cassidy dropped into the seat beside her with the speed of a rumor. Light up, will you? Rose said, brushing a hand over her hair. Didn't you get the word? Donovan grabbed your fancy boy and took him to the back. They're about to work it out the clover leaf way. Rose turned her head, admiring her pinned curls in a darkened window. Be honest, does this style suit me? Maggie's hand flew to her chest. The world lurched. They can't. Her voice was barely there. Dempsey can't fight him. She couldn't finish the sentence. She didn't know which man she feared for more. Why do you care? Rose asked, bored and bright. Some of 'em mix it up every hop. But Maggie was already up, slipping sideways through dancers and chairs, her path a jagged lightning bolt across the room. The music started again without her. The door at the back surrendered under her shoulder like it had been waiting to let her through. Whatever was waiting behind that door would break the spell or break much more. The back hallway was dim, the kind of dim that makes sounds sharper, men breathing, a shoe scuff, a low voice saying, "Ready?" Maggie didn't pause long enough to be afraid. She hit the next door hard, and it swung open on its old hinges, the room behind it lit by a single bulb that hummed like a warning. Everything froze for a heartbeat, as if someone had cut the scene out of time. The board stood in a rough circle, watches face up in their hands, the way referees do before a bell. Dempsey had shrugged off his jacket and rolled his shirt sleeves neatly to his forearms. He was light on his feet, eyes clear, shoulders soft the way a cat's are soft before it strikes. Across from him, Terry didn't match the stance. He stood with his arms crossed and a look in his eyes that had nothing to do with sport. Maggie saw it the same moment Andy Geoghegan did, the flash of metal at Terry's chest. He moved fast, but she moved faster. She didn't think, she flew. A scream tore from her as she launched herself at Terry's raised arm and caught it, all her weight hanging from it for a half breath. Something bright clattered to the floor and rang out with a sound that made the room colder. A knife. Long, slim, and cruel. For a second, nobody spoke. In the give and takes back room, fists were fair. Cold steel had never been part of the deal. Andy nudged the blade with the toe of his shoe, tilted his head like a collector faced with some artifact from a world he didn't study. The men exchanged a dozen looks without moving their mouths. Terry hissed a string of words through his teeth, too fast for Maggie to catch, the accent wrong for the name he'd chosen. It was as if the room had pulled his mask away. He wasn't the O'Sullivan he'd claimed. He was someone else, someone the neighborhood would have eyed with suspicion and called by an ugly slur. Dempsey didn't flare up. He didn't need to. He stared at Terry the way you look at a stray that's wandered in, not from malice, but from some instinct that says, "This is not where you belong." Then he tipped his jaw toward the back stairs. "Out," he said, calm as a judge. "Back way. Your hat'll follow." William McMahon stepped to the window and slid it up. Andy scooped the knife like it offended him and held it between finger and thumb. The board parted, opening the paths. There was no argument left in Terry, not here, not now. Pride had to bow to the rules of the house. He slipped past Dempsey, past the door, into the black spine of the building. The door shut, a dull thud that sounded like the end of a story. But there was one more scene to play out. Maggie turned to Dempsey, face white except for two burning patches of color on her cheeks. Tears ran but didn't drown the steadiness in her eyes. "I knew it," she said, barely choking. "I knew he wasn't who he said." The words came out in little bursts, ashamed and brave at once. "His real name is Tony Spinelli. When I heard you were squaring up with him, I ran because men like him sometimes carry knives. But you don't understand, Dempsey. I've never had a fellow. I got tired of being the one who stands and watches. I asked him to use a different name. I told him it would go easier for him if he said he was an O'Sullivan. I was wrong. I'll resign from the club." Her voice broke, but she kept her gaze level. She wasn't asking for mercy. She was telling the truth she owed to the room. The blade had fallen, but Maggie's confession cut deeper, and what Dempsey chose next would surprise them all. For a beat, no one moved. Sweat cooled on the men's forearms. The bulb hummed on. You could sense two kinds of silence in the room, the kind that followed the echo of a dropped knife, and the kind that comes right before someone makes a decision that will be remembered for a long time. Dempsey lifted his chin toward Andy, still holding the slick, offending stiletto. "Toss that cheese slicer out the window," he said, voice light again, "and tell them inside Mr. O'Sullivan just caught a telephone call. He's been called downtown, important business." William slid the window higher. The knife arced into the night and vanished like a bad idea. Then Dempsey faced Maggie, but without the frost he'd carried into the dance floor a few minutes before. There was something almost gentle in the way he looked at her, as if he'd just remembered she wasn't a witness to a fight, but a girl who had tried to carve a door in a wall that didn't give. The board, already pros at discretion, began to drift back into the hallway. Their watches snapped shut. By the time the music swelled in the main hall, the back room contained only the echo of what nearly happened and two people who needed a different kind of conversation. Maggie stood straighter, swallowing the last of her tears. "I'm sorry," she said, small and fierce. "I thought if he came as himself, nobody would let him near the place. I wanted one night where somebody came for me, that's all. I shouldn't have asked him to pretend. I shouldn't have brought anyone who would bring a knife. I didn't know, but it was my doing. I won't stay where I'm not wanted." Her words landed without wobble. She wasn't pleading. She was bracing for an answer, whatever it would be. Dempsey let the quiet hold a moment, like a trainer giving a boxer time to breathe between rounds. He had a reputation, hard, careful, not cruel, but not soft. The men looked up to him because he never flinched, never lost his footing, never let the law or a rival club get the better of him. But the things that make a man dangerous often share space with the things that make him decent. Dempsey knew what Maggie had felt like along those walls. He'd seen her there for months, a kind smile anchoring her in place while others spun. "You don't resign," he said finally, like a verdict. "You did what you thought you had to do to get a dance. It was the wrong way, sure, but it was a brave try." A corner of his mouth tilted, almost a smile. "Besides, the ladies haven't seen a fight at a clover leaf hop in years." "Let's keep it that way." Maggie's breath trembled out. Relief didn't erase the regret, but it softened its edges. He took up his jacket, slid his arms into it, and buttoned it with quick, neat motions. "I'll see you home," he said, like it was the most ordinary offer in the world. No fuss. For a second, Maggie couldn't answer. The proposal was simple, but it rearranged the night in her chest. walking home with Dempsey Donovan after what had almost been a spectacle. She glanced toward the closed door to the hall, thinking of Anna, of whispers, of what this would mean in a room that traded in reputation like currency. If you want to, she managed. I want to, he said, and it sounded like a promise he'd keep without leaning too hard on it. He nodded toward the door. Come on. We'll take the long way out. They stepped into the dim hallway together. Somewhere, the band bounced into a spirited number and the floor applauded. Life at the hall resumed, as it always does once trouble was escorted out the back. The fight was over, but the walk home had a way of changing how both of them thought about Saturday nights. They slipped into the night by a quieter stairwell, one that emptied onto a narrow lane suite with the faint trace of cigar smoke and last week's rain. The city's hum felt friendly at that hour, carriages clattering a block away, voices fading into doorways, a cat leaping an alley gap like it had practiced. Dempsey didn't hurry. He set a pace Maggie could match without fuss, hands tucked, eyes forward. For a while neither spoke. The pause wasn't heavy. It felt clean, like air after a storm passes. Maggie tried to make peace with the pieces of the evening that lay all around her, the glamour of being wanted, the shock of steel on wood, the bare honesty of her own confession. You were brave in there, Dempsey said at last. I was scared, Maggie answered. That's not the same thing, he said. Lots of people are scared. Not many jump at a man with a knife in his hand. Maggie gave a small breath of a laugh. Maybe I didn't know enough to be afraid the right way. They crossed Orchard Street, where the lamps cast cones of light that looked almost solid. She could have filled the quiet with apologies. She felt so full of them the words scratched at her throat, but the night didn't seem to demand more punishment. Instead, it offered space. If you don't mind me asking, Dempsey said, why him? Maggie understood what he meant. Not why any boy, but why that one. She shook her head, a rueful, puzzled gesture she often used at the factory when a box refused to fold cleanly. He looked the part, she said, walked like he'd always been welcome. I thought if somebody like that took my arm, the room would finally see me the way I wanted to be seen. I didn't ask enough about the rest. I thought I was borrowing a dream just for a few hours. He nodded, like a man who'd once wanted something for show and learned the cost. Sometimes the expensive things are cheap, he said, and the sturdy things don't shine. They turned onto Maggie's block, which held the sweet, sad comfort of the familiar stoops with chipped paint, windows flickering with the last of the evening's talk, a distant radio struggling against static. She pictured Anna's face when she told her everything, how she'd held her breath for Maggie and then had it stolen by the knife's clatter. Anna would forgive her, but it would take a conversation and maybe a few tears, and then one of those long, quiet hugs that fixes more than it breaks. Rose said they fight every hop, Maggie said, mostly to herself. Sometimes tempers do what they do, Dempsey said, but not where the ladies can see, not anymore. We learned that lesson and we kept it. Maggie glanced at him. You run a tight floor, he smiled, an actual smile this time, quick and unpracticed. We try. It's supposed to be a place where the week melts off your shoulders, a few songs. A few laughs. She stopped in front of her building and turned to him, grateful, embarrassed, uncertain. Thank you for walking me, she said, and for handling it. It's my job, he answered, and also not my job. Both, she didn't know what else to say, so she said the truest thing. Tonight started like a dream, she said quietly, and ended like a warning. Somewhere in the middle of that was the nicest dance I ever had. Maybe the next one doesn't need the warning, he said. Maggie lifted her eyes. The sentence hung between them, warm as a porch light beckoning you the last few steps home. He hadn't asked the question yet, but when he did, it would turn her longest hope into a date on the calendar. The week between Saturdays is longer for some hearts than others. In the days that followed, Maggie moved through the factory with a gentleness that surprised her coworkers. She didn't snap a single lid crooked. She didn't cut her fingers once. Something in her had settled and fluttered at the same time. Anna listened to the whole story at Maggie's kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, eyebrows leaping and settling with every revelation. You saved Dempsey from a knife, Anna said at the end, half scandalized, half proud. I don't know who I saved, Maggie said, honest as ever. Maybe I saved the room from seeing something it shouldn't. You saved yourself, Anna added softly. From believing somebody like that was the only way to be seen. They sat a while in companionable silence. Then Anna leaned across the table with a grin that tried not to be a squeal. He walked you home, she said. Dempsey Donovan walked you home. He did, and he said maybe next time. Maggie's voice tripped over its own hope. Anna squeezed her hands. Say the word and I'll find you the prettiest ribbon on Hester Street. They spent an evening making a dress feel new with small changes, replacing a tired collar, stitching a narrow band of lace where none had been before, pressing creases that announced themselves without shouting. They did her hair not like a different person's, but like herself on her very best day. Maggie's mirror reflected a face that didn't ask for permission. It simply said, I'm here. Jimmy, for his part, tried to grumble but failed. He's not so bad, he admitted finally when cornered. With me anyway. Don't try to be noble, Anna told him, laughing. Just don't be wrong. Meanwhile, the neighborhood hummed with its usual rumors about Dempsey, stories with edges that glinted, stories polished with admiration till they sounded like folklore. He had a way of collecting loyalty without asking for it out loud. The older men outside the cigar shop nodded when his name came up, the way men nod when they approve of something they can't or won't name precisely. Saturday came down the week like a curtain lowering. Maggie felt the old nerves, the old tremors, but they weren't the same. She knew what it was like to be invisible. She knew what it was like to be seen for the wrong reasons. Maybe tonight she might be seen for herself. She stood by the window at 7 sharp, hands resting lightly against the sill, listening for the cadence of footsteps she'd only heard once at her door but already knew. The hallway outside her apartment was warm and smelled faintly of starch from a neighbor's iron. Somewhere upstairs, a baby squealed and was soothed. Even the building paused, as if it understood the importance of a knock. When it came, it sounded the way all decisive moments do, ordinary on the surface, world-changing underneath. She opened the door, and there he was, neat as a new bill, tie straight, eyes calm. He didn't dazzle, he didn't pose. He just looked like a man who meant to keep his word. You ready? Dempsey asked. I am, she said, and it was true in more ways than one. The street to the hall hadn't changed, but for Maggie, every step felt like a debut. They walked toward Orchard Street side by side, no rush in their stride. Dempsey tipped his hat to an old woman sweeping her stoop. Maggie greeted 2 factory girls headed the other way, who whispered and blushed and giggled when they thought they were out of earshot. The sky laned toward night without quite giving up its last blue. The day's heat had broken, and the city, merciful for once, let people breathe. The board will keep the back room quiet tonight, Dempsey said, conversational as weather. Maggie smiled. Was it ever loud? Once, long before you started coming. He glanced at her. We got better. I like the hall, she said. Even when I was a piece of furniture along the wall, I liked the music. I liked how everyone's week seemed to fall off them like dust. It's meant for that, he said. It's not a church, and it's not a ring, though sometimes men come in thinking it is. It's a room where you can be something softer for a few hours. That's worth guarding. Thank you for guarding it, she said. They reached the door. The give and take sign looked the same as ever, paint a little faded at the edges, as if 100 happy nights had rubbed against it. Inside, the band tuned up bright and cheeky. Maggie felt the old flutter rise. Will people stare? Will they talk? But Dempsey's arm, offered simply, steadied her. She took it. The room turned just a little as they stepped in. Not dramatically, no gasps or dropped glasses, but attention has a weight, and she felt it settle. Anna's face, in the cluster of girls near the far wall, lit like sunrise. Jimmy tried to arrange his features into cool. They refused. He was grinning. Dempsey didn't make an announcement. He didn't need to. He moved through the room with the easy authority of a man tidying up without being noticed. He nodded to the board. He shook Big Mike's hand when the man made his ritual 5-minute glide past the door and said nothing more than, "Good to see you." Big Mike looked at Maggie, smiled with his eyes, and drifted on. Jimmy gave an approving cut across his chin that said, "All square." Maggie let the music touch her feet. The first dance came from Dempsey himself, not as a prize, not as a spectacle, but as an ordinary invitation. He led with a steadiness that surprised her. He knew when to turn, when to pause, when to let the music do the talking. He didn't perform. He kept her safe in the circle they made together, and that felt better than shine. Between sets, girls came to her with open arms and open questions. She didn't give them the backroom version. She didn't owe that to the rumor mill. She gave them the parts that mattered, the new lace, the way the walk to the hall felt different, the way it feels when a man asks you because he likes the way you laugh. That was enough. Across the room, the boys who had measured Terry O'Sullivan a week ago took new stock of the night. They understood something had been decided, quietly and permanently, in the space between last Saturday and this one. Dempsey had not boasted. He had simply appeared at Maggie's door and kept pace with her all the way to the dance floor. When the band slid into a slower tune, Dempsey looked down at Maggie with a question in his eyes that she understood without words. Another, she nodded. The dance unspooled like a ribbon, no snags, no drama, just the relief of finally fitting the song. There was only one question left, the one he would ask under the hall lights as the night thinned and the future brightened. The night ran the way good nights do, untroubled, unhurried, full of ordinary joys that feel like miracles to those who waited for them. Maggie danced, laughed, rested, and danced again. Once, during a break, she caught a glimpse of herself reflected in a darkened window. What she saw wasn't a girl straining to be noticed, but a young woman who belonged in her own life. That realization put a light in her that no compliment could have. Dempsey kept his distance when he should and closed it when it felt right. He didn't crowd her. He didn't make a spectacle of their pair. If anyone in the room had a joke to make about last week's fireworks, they kept it. The board saw to that with a glance or two that said, "Move along, son." By now, the hall hummed with the kind of contentment that had nothing to prove. Paperbox girls bright in their best, give and take boys on their best behavior, the band a reliable friend. Near closing, as the crowd thinned by a row of chairs, Dempsey found Maggie at the edge of the floor. He didn't lift his chin in that boss's way he used when settling an argument. He softened his gaze and looked at her like a man considering the best route home on a pleasant street. "Mag," he said, and her name sounded easy in his mouth. "I'll see you home, and how about next Saturday night? If I call for you again, will you come with me to the hop?" It didn't feel like a proclamation. It felt like a door unlocked and held for her. Maggie's eyes changed in an instant, from steady to shining, from careful to bright. She'd learned not to grab at hope. She'd learned to hold herself quietly so life wouldn't see how hungry she was. But this wasn't a scrap tossed from someone else's plate. This was an invitation set in front of her with care. "With you, Dempsey," she said, and the words surprised her by how full they sounded. Then she laughed, a soft, unafraid laugh that seemed to make room in the hall for more music that night and all the nights to come. "Will a duck swim?" The answer made him grin, properly grin, the way men seldom let themselves in public. He offered his arm, and she took it. They walked out into the familiar street that had decided to look new for them, and the door swung shut behind them with a little click that sounded like punctuation. This then was Maggie's coming out, not the kind with bouquets and announcements, but the kind that mattered more. The kind where a girl who had lived in the margins took one step forward and found that the scene had space for her after all. It wasn't a fairy tale. There had been a knife in the wings and pride at stake. But standing under the lamplight with a man who didn't need to perform to be strong, Maggie felt something cleaner than enchantment. She felt seen and chosen and safe. On another Saturday, there would be more dances. There would be small jokes with Anna in the dressing mirror and Jimmy's gruff approvals and nods from the cigar men out front. There might be arguments because life has those and big decisions that don't announce themselves until they've already rearranged the furniture. But tonight, this night, was simple. It began with a room that wasn't always kind and ended with a promise meant to be kept. If you want more timeless East Side tales of love, luck, and second chances, stay tuned. The next story waits just outside the hall door.